All right, artists, this is part 2 of the paper weaving video. Hopefully you've already watched the first part and you have a paper loom and you have long, skinny pieces of colorful paper ready to start weaving with, okay? If you haven't watched the first video, go back and watch that one first. So I know it's easier for you to see the whole paper this direction, but I always turn my paper this way, turn my loom this direction with my safety line across the top, and that's the way I weave. So I'm going to leave it like that for now, but of course the rest of my paper is just hanging out at the bottom. So I'm going to choose one of my pieces of long, skinny, colorful paper, and I'm going to start by sticking it under the first side of my loom over here. Okay, let's get this down so maybe you can see it a little bit better. So I'm going to create a pattern where I go under one piece of my loom and over the next. Under one and over the next. Under, over, under, over. And then when I get to the end, I'll take my finger and I'll wiggle it up till it's at the top as tight as I can be, all the way up at the top. Okay, now I'm going to pick out another piece of paper. I personally think it looks best if you create a pattern. So I like this fancy paper, but I'm not going to use the same one next. But you can if you want. You're the artist. So I'm going to start it, and I'm going to do it wrong the first time. And you see if you can notice what I'm doing wrong. Under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over. And I'll wiggle it up toward the top. All right, now it doesn't look terrible, but compare it with my paper weaving. Can you notice what I did wrong? I need to create a pattern where the first paper I stuck under goes under, but my next piece of long and skinny paper, I have to start it the opposite. It's going to go over. So instead of starting this one underneath the first part of the loom, I'm going to start it over. So I go over the first one and under the second. Over this one and under the next. And then I keep on going. Over, under, over, under. I'm at the end, so I'm going to wiggle it up tight with my fingers. And now, this time, I have a pattern started where it's not the same every time. This first one I started under, but the next one is the opposite, over. So let me grab another piece of paper, and I'll do it blue this time. And now I'm going to keep going. But remember, I can't start over because I just did that. You always have to check that you are starting the opposite of what you did the last time. So under, over, under, over. I always say it's kind of like, think of a dolphin that's kind of diving under the waves. It goes under one and over the next. Under one and over the next. Sometimes it can be kind of tricky. Under one, over the next, but you'll stick with it, I know. And then when you're done, remember, you want to keep it kind of tight. So you got to wiggle it, wiggle, wiggle, wiggle until it goes all the way up to the top. And you can see I've got my pattern starting. So there's kind of a funny word for what this is called. If you're a weaver, there are two things you use called warp and weft. And actually, you have both of those already on this weaving. The warp is this part that's never moving. It stays still. The weft is the part of your weaving that's traveling back and forth, that's doing the under, over, under, over. So all of these colorful pieces of paper that you got ready are your weft. And these pieces of your loom are our warp on this project. So your job is to keep going with your weft until you get all the way to the bottom of the loom and you can't fit any more on. So I'm just going to do a couple more for you here today, and I'm going to make another mistake on purpose, and you see if you can catch what I'm doing wrong. Okay, now I know I have to do the opposite of what I just did, and I just went under, so I'm going to start out over, over, under, over, under, over, under. Okay, wiggle it up to the top. Did you catch what I did wrong? I went over 2 instead of over 1, under its neighbor, over 1, under its neighbor. The first piece of good news, though, is this is super easy to fix. I can just pull it out. The second piece of good news is actually you could design your own weaving patterns. Under, over is the first one you should learn. It's probably the easiest. But maybe once you get the hang of it, you could experiment with what happens when you skip 2 on purpose. Then it's not a mistake. It's more like a beautiful oops. You could see what you could discover. But for this weaving today, I'm going to try to keep the pattern going. And if you notice something doesn't look right, just stop and check. Did you start off the opposite of what you did before? And did you check and make sure you went over 1, under its neighbor, over 1, under its neighbor? Because if you keep on going and you get all the way to the bottom, you end up with something that looks like this. And I will say your last piece can be a little bit tricky because it gets kind of tight at the bottom when you're putting your last one in. But just stick with it. Be patient. Wiggle it in there really good. Push it up tight until you can't fit any more in. And you have this really awesome pattern that you've created. And if you've got it woven pretty tightly, you can turn it over and you'll have another pattern on the back. And then you can do this sneaky little trick. If you fold your loom closed, you have like a secret pocket at the back. I always think that's kind of cool, but I'm going to carefully open it back up because I love the way it turned out. And once you create a weaving like this doesn't have to be the finished art project. You could use this to maybe cut a shape out of. It could be like the body of an animal, or it could be the start of a card. You could use that fold we have in the middle of our loom. You could turn this into a card, or it kind of reminds me of like a picnic basket or a picnic blanket or something. So you could use your imagination and turn this into whatever you want. So if you finish your paper weaving, you can watch my next video about how to use string and yarn to make a friendship bracelet. You can also maybe do a little weaving scavenger hunt around your house, because I bet you have some things in your house that were made by weaving. Maybe you don't even know it. You can ask an adult in your family to help you, but I'll show you 2 things that I found in my house that were made by weaving. The first one is a rug. And if you look at it closely, let me turn it this direction, I think you can see it. I love this kind of rug because it's actually made by old scraps of colorful fabric. And so it's recycled, but when it's put together, it's really pretty. And if you look very closely at it, these little white pieces that are going up and down are the warp. When the person who made this rug made it, that was the part that never moves. And these colorful pieces of fabric were the weft, the part they made the pattern of under, over with. So I have a couple rugs like this. I think they're pretty cool. And I also have a piece of fabric that I bought when I went to South America last summer, to the country of Peru. They have beautiful fabric in Peru. And so this is a colorful piece of fabric that was made with weaving. And the string they use to weave with is really tiny, so you can't see the warp and the weft quite as easily. But if you looked at it with a magnifying glass, you would be able to tell that this is made by weaving too. So you can see what you can find in your house. You can see what you can create with your weaving. And I'm excited to see what you guys come up with. Let me know if you have any questions. If something is kind of tricky for you or you're having a problem, you can send me an email and I will let you know what I can do to help. Okay? Talk to you guys soon.